Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online, news that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Anthony Moreno. Today on the program, we return to the issue of voting in New Mexico. Joining us is Molly Swank, Executive Director of Common Cause New Mexico. Molly, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
I'd like to start off by learning a little bit more about your organization. What's the mission of Common Cause?
Sure. So Common Cause New Mexico is part of a national organization. We focus on democracy issues. I always say that we're an advocacy organization focusing on democracy issues such as voting rights, election protection, transparency in government, good government work, ethics, the whole gambit of democracy issues.
Okay, now your organization has rolled out efforts to protect the vote in New Mexico. Can you tell us about this program?
Yes, thank you. So Common Cause New Mexico, every election season runs an election protection program. And really what that means is that we are working with volunteers and election administrators across the state to make sure that our elections run smoothly and efficiently. So we recruit and train volunteers to be poll monitors, which means outside of our polling locations. So making sure, and our volunteers are looking for things like long lines, delays at the polling locations, if there's any intimidation happening outside of the polling location, or if there's just any barriers. And our volunteers work with, we have a hotline where people can report problems to, which connects them to lawyers from across the country and specifically in New Mexico, who also work with the Secretary of State's office, county clerks, and we're just really trying to make sure that everybody who wants to vote can vote, and it's safe and easy and effective.
So for folks interested in volunteering and joining this program, how long is the training process? What are the steps they need to do again?
Yeah, so we are currently building up our program. So we're currently in the recruitment phase. And if you are interested, or if anybody's interested in being a volunteer, they can go to protectthevote.net and create a profile, and they'll be able to see our trainings, our upcoming trainings, and sign up for shifts directly through that website. So it's pretty easy to use. And we have 3 trainings coming up. They're about an hour long. And so we're preparing for the primary election, which is in 43 days. So the trainings are an hour long, and we'll cover election protection, we'll cover voters' rights, what to watch for, de-escalation, just making sure that folks feel prepared to be outside of a polling location and to help voters.
How big of a need is this right now in New Mexico?
We have a pretty big need. In 2022, I believe we had hundreds of volunteers at polling locations across the state. This year, we're preparing for a smaller program, but we are still hoping to have at least 250, 300 volunteers at targeted polling locations. And so honestly, we're not going to turn anybody away. If this is something that interests you and you want to get involved in elections and helping voters, Common Cause is your go-to place. We'll definitely plug everyone in.
I see. We've seen reports of issues at polling places across the country in previous elections. How big of a problem is it in New Mexico?
We have had some polling locations where there will be people who are trying to block access to the polling location. So either they're blocking the fences or the parking lots. We have seen instances of intimidation. So people either trying to electioneer within the polling location, around the polling location, just kind of scare voters out of getting them to get out of line. So we're trying to reduce all of that. And our volunteer program has been very successful. We've worked with hundreds of volunteers and lawyers, and we really do, we center around making sure folks feel safe when they vote.
New Mexico has ranked pretty high when it comes to rolling out elections and the carrying out of elections. A project out of MIT recently ranked the state top in the country when it comes to rolling out elections. And so I'd like to hear from you, what sort of steps do you think the state needs to continue to work on?
Mexico has been phenomenal when it comes to voting legislation and passing bills, like you had mentioned. Common Cause was part of a coalition last year that helped pass the New Mexico Voting Rights Act, which really changed voting in New Mexico, or it will in this election and moving forward. We have expanded drop boxes for ballots. It's easier for folks to request absentee ballots. You don't have to have a reason to request an absentee ballot. Anyone can do it. And part of that is that you can request to be on the permanent absentee list moving forward, starting in this primary election moving forward. So if you want your ballot mailed to you permanently, so you don't have to worry about going to polling locations, that is already available on the Secretary of State's website. And I think that we just continue to make these changes that help voters, and Common Cause is going to continue fighting for that. I would love to see, and another big piece of the Voting Rights Act was the Native American Voting Rights Act, which expands voting on tribal lands. So Common Cause and our partners who work with the tribal governments and the Council of Governments, we were able to get more ballot boxes on tribal land, and it'll be easier for folks to register on tribal lands. And I think just incremental changes like that really change how voters approach elections and increase our access to elections.
Can you share a little bit more about steps New Mexico's legislature has taken to make voting easier and safer in the state? You brought up a couple of things right there, but what are some other things that you think really made a difference?
So just this year in the legislative session, a bill was passed that restricts guns in polling locations. So that is a big fear tactic or intimidation tactic that we're seeing across the country. And so New Mexico, that was one thing that we did. We said no thank you to guns in polling locations. Folks who have a concealed carry license are able to carry into polling locations, but they can't be used as an intimidation tactic. It can't be visible. We also passed laws about intimidation. So for our election workers, there are criminal penalties if you try to intimidate or harass election officials. Our ballot boxes are extremely secure, as is our automatic voter registration and our absentee mail-in process as well.
Steps to change absentee voting have been implemented, as you mentioned. There's also been steps on voting locations, making it accessible for folks in the state to cast their ballot. How key are these steps in making voting accessible for all?
Yeah, I think that the less barriers or the fewer barriers folks have to voting, the higher our turnout is going to be. And I think that really shows or will be more representative for our democracy. So New Mexico has a really good turnout right now, and we have good registration levels. 83.9% of folks who are of voting age in New Mexico are registered to vote. And specifically in Doña Ana County, 132,000 people are registered to vote. So I think that if we can reduce the barriers to help to get the barriers for folks to vote, the more likely they will be voters.
So compared to other states across the country, would you say New Mexico is doing well when it comes to voter turnout?
I do. I mean, working in this space, I think there's always room for improvement, but New Mexicans really care about their communities and show up at the ballot box.
What sort of things is your organization paying the most attention to as we lead up to the primary election in New Mexico?
Right now, we are really focused on our election protection volunteer recruitment. We are working with coalition partners across the state to recruit people from not just in Albuquerque or Santa Fe. We really would love to have volunteers across the state in all different counties. So we are going to be working with coalition partners for recruitment. Um, we'll be doing some advertising around the program. We'll be working with election officials, county clerks, city clerks to identify people who are interested in poll watching and poll monitoring. And we're also going to be working directly with election administrators to try to recruit poll workers as well.
One of the steps the state has taken in recent years to improve more voting for folks in the primary election is to allow those who are independent or declined to state to change their party so they can vote in the primary election. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you think it may make an impact in primary elections?
Yeah. So in New Mexico, independent and declined to say or DTS voters can vote in primaries. They just have to change their registration to either Democrat or Republican, either at the polling place, which you can do the day that you go vote, or you can do it online on the New Mexico Secretary of State's website. So if you go to nmvote.org, you can update your party affiliation and then get a ballot for whichever party you choose to register with. And then if you don't want to stay with that party after the election, you can change your registration again back to DTS or independent. So the Secretary of State is trying to make it easier for folks to participate in primaries because they are an important part of the electoral process.
How do you see that playing a role in folks casting their ballots in the primary election when it comes to numbers? Do you think it can really make a difference in raising the numbers of ballots being cast in the primary?
I'm hopeful. I think that, the primary is where people get to cast their ballot for the folks that really align with their value system. So there may be multiple Democratic candidates, there may be multiple Republican candidates, but through the primary, that's when you get to pick the candidate that whose values mostly align with yours. And so by changing your registration and allowing these folks to change their registration to vote in the primary, I think it's an exciting, it's a cool way to participate in primaries.
There's also been steps in recent years to address absentee voting and making it easier for folks. You talked about that a little bit earlier in this conversation. Can you share a little bit more about how you think that may impact folks from, actually even going to the polls? They may be very happy with casting their ballot at home. I know a lot of folks do that and have in more growing numbers. So can you talk a little bit about how that may impact voting in the state?
Yes. So I think that absentee voting is one of the best ways for folks to participate in elections. You don't have to go wait in line. You can do it from the comfort of your kitchen counter, from the coffee table. You can have voter guides, or you can have information with you while you're voting at home. I personally vote absentee. I think it's like I said, it's easier, it's safe, and it's so convenient. And I think that that's what's so important about voting is convenience. And our absentee laws here in New Mexico really take into account folks' lives. Not everybody can, with childcare, with their work, their family schedules, can get to a poll and wait in line. So it makes it more accessible, and it takes into account folks' different situations.
You mentioned the New Mexico Voting Rights Act and how that has played a role in the state. Can you share a little bit more about the impact it's had on protecting the vote in New Mexico?
Yes, the Voting Rights Act was such a huge effort. There was a coalition that had been working on it for years, so it was really exciting to see it pass last year. And it has several different layers and and updates to voting. It includes early voting. It expands early voting. There will be a, automatic voter registration with the New Mexico Voting Rights Act. So when folks interact with government, government entities such as the MVD, they can register to vote. They will be registered to vote. So there's just more opportunity to get people involved in the electoral process. With the ballot boxes, there are ballot boxes, and there will be more ballot boxes per county where folks can drop off their ballots. And it's completely safe. Our elections, as you said, our election administration has been ranked #1 by MIT, which means that we are very secure. We look at all aspects of elections, so from the front end of people casting their ballots to the back end, auditing auditing the ballot results and everything. So New Mexico, our elections are very safe and looked at nationally.
New Mexico also has same-day registration. Can you share a little bit about what that means?
Yeah. So in a lot of different states, you have to either apply on paper or online, or you have to go somewhere to register to vote. But here in New Mexico, you can show up at your polling location on election day or at any of the polling locations during early vote and register when you get there. So, it's not multiple stops. It's not multiple steps to cast your ballot. You just need to have your, a bill that proves your address, and you can register to vote while you're at the polling location.
Your organization has been involved with a number of issues when it comes to voting, elections, and state government. Your organization was also involved in the creation of an ethics commission. Can you share a little bit about that and why you feel it's needed in New Mexico?
Yeah, the Ethics Commission is a very important body when it comes to our legislature. They're common cause across the country. We work towards creating, a more ethical government for constituents, and just making sure that the people who are representing us and have this decision-making power, that they're acting on behalf of their community and their constituents. So this ethics commission takes a little bit. So if there are any ethics complaints against legislators or committees, that this commission will come in and look at what's happening to make sure that our government is behaving well, behaving, in terms of how their communities want them to act, and making sure that they're not breaking any laws.
Your organization has also been involved in efforts to, modernize the legislature. Can you talk about that a little bit and, why you think it's needed?
Sure. So a lot of people don't know that New Mexico's legislature is the only volunteer legislature in the country. So our legislators, our elected officials on the state level, do not receive a salary, and we're the last state to be like that. We also have very short session lengths. So we have a 30-day session and then a 60-day session, and it alternates between those two. So one thing that Common Cause is working on right now is modernizing that. We are working with the coalition to bring the New Mexico legislature into the 2000s. So our coalition is working on creating a commission to set a legislator salary, so that when and if legislators do get paid, they're not determining their own wages. There will be a commission that will be appointed to help establish the salaries. And then we're also looking at extending our sessions. Our sessions are so short, it's very hard to get bills passed in our short sessions, especially the 30-day sessions, because those sessions can only focus on the New Mexico budget, so things that will cost the state money. And legislators have to work to get the call of the governor. So if the governor doesn't want to work on your issue or doesn't call it to the floor, that it won't be covered. So by modernizing it, we're hoping that we'll have a more reflective legislature compared to our communities. Because right now, if you run for office, you kind of have to you have to be either wealthy or retired or very resourceful. You have to subsidize your own office. And this can lead to issues like conflicts of interest, people, trying to be a legislator and run their own business. And the issues that our state faces now are so complex. Our communities deserve representation that's there full time, that can take their calls and answer their questions and really deep dive into policies that will improve our state. And the last thing about modernization that Common Cause is advocating for is paid staff. So our legislature also does not have paid staff. So there's a lot of reliance on advocacy groups like Common Cause, a reliance on lobbyists for information about the policies and the bills that are going through the roundhouse. So we really think that modernization is the next big step to better New Mexico's government as a whole.
Yeah, you covered a lot of issues there when it comes to modernizing the legislature. Just the paid staff component of it. How do you think that can make a difference when lawmakers in the state would actually have somebody who could respond to something like constituent services?
Yeah, I think that is so important. I have found and I have heard from people in communities that it's hard to get a hold of their elected officials when they need something or when they want to, talk to somebody about supporting a bill that they want, passed in the legislative session. So having a staff person who can take those questions and take those advocacy calls is really important to democracy and making community members' voices heard. The staff will also be able to help with the policy analysis. So they'll be able to deep dive into the legislation and work with the legislators to make sure that they fully understand the bills that they're voting on. There have been times where bills pass so quickly in the session that we have to go back, or the legislature has to go back in following sessions and correct mistakes because there wasn't anybody, they passed it so quickly and there was no analysis. So having paid staff will not only impact how our legislators work, but it'll impact how our communities get to interact with their elected officials.
If state lawmakers are paid, does that also up the professionalism in the legislature?
We believe so. I personally think that with a more representative, a legislature that looks like our communities, we can better serve our communities. And having that professionalism of the legislature it's essential to, there could be people that want to run for office right now that just aren't able to because they can't afford it. They don't get time off of their job. And this it just makes sense for what a big role and responsibility it is to be an elected official.
If lawmakers have to work a full-time job, then also serve in the legislature, attend interim meetings, how does that favor lobbyists?
That gives I believe that gives lobbyists a lot of power. They are able to wine and dine. They're able to take legislators out to dinner and to lunches and, just kind of be in their ear a lot more because the legislators currently aren't paid. They don't have the income to go out to dinner on their own or, go out to lunch on their own. So they're relying on the lobbyists a lot more than other states that have paid legislatures, for sure.
Okay, I want to get back to the program that you're really focusing on with your organization, at the polls, making sure that people are watching what's going on, protecting the vote. Can you share with us a little bit about how you think this is going to play a role in the upcoming general election?
Yes, definitely. So the program is called Election Protection. I'm just going to plug the sign up one more time. So it's protectthevote.net. That's how you can go and create a profile and sign up for our trainings and sign up to be poll monitors across the state. The phone number to sign up is 505-417-4999. 4012. And these are the volunteers that are going to be at the polling locations outside, answering voters' questions, just making sure that things are running smoothly, that there aren't huge lines, that there's no barriers or intimidation happening outside of the polling location. And those volunteers are going to work with election officials inside, and then also with a hotline directly to lawyers who connect with the Secretary of State's and the county clerk's offices. So our program really is about protecting the right to vote and casting your ballot on Election Day.
This program, how does it play a role in democracy in New Mexico?
I mean, elections are one of the biggest way that communities get to participate in their government, and election protection allows every person, one person equals one vote. And if our volunteers are helping voters outside of the polling location, answering their questions and making sure they get inside, I think that is the basis of our democracy, is making sure that our community's voices are heard on the ballot, and then who represents them and who makes decisions for them.
Molly Swank is Executive Director of Common Cause New Mexico. Molly, thanks for hanging out with us and answering all of our questions.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
That's it for this episode of Newsmakers. As we close the program, we want to remind you that KRWG Public Media is asking for you to share your questions you have about voting or questions you have for candidates running this year. You can submit your questions at krwg.org. Your thoughts and questions can help drive our election coverage this year. I'm Anthony Moreno. Thank you for joining us for Newsmakers. We'll see you next time.